Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
Welcome to Mortification of Spin. My name is Carl Trueman. I teach religious studies, biblical and religious studies at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania. And I'm here with my long-standing friend and co-host, the Reverend Todd Pruitt, pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church, a congregation of the Presbyterian Church in America, based in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Good as always to be with you, Todd.
Great to see you, Carl. Good to chat with you. Always a pleasure. I know that you feel particularly blessed to number me among your friends, and I think you're swell.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, you are among my top three friends, and when you think that I only actually have four friends, that's pretty good. So.
That's right. You know, Carl, somebody was asking me recently at a conference I was at. They said, "How long have you known Carl? How did you meet Carl?" And I gave them, the story. I think I've talked about it on here before, but it just reminded me when I was getting ready to move to Philadelphia in 2009, I'd seen all the furor going on at Westminster over a particular Old Testament professor, and I saw your name as the academic dean, and you were the academic dean, and I had recently, interestingly enough, around that time picked up a book, just a collection of your essays entitled Mortification of Spin. And I had loved reading them. And then I saw that this controversy going on over basically the trustworthiness of Scripture and how you were the academic dean. Then I stumbled upon an anonymously ran website that just was like going after you, guns a-blazing. And I thought, man, this is fascinating. And then I found out, I accepted a call to Philadelphia. I go to Philadelphia. And one of the board members said, "Hey, would you like to meet anybody on faculty?" And I said, "I need to meet Carl Trueman. I really like this little book I got recently, and I would love to pick his brain about what's been going on and yada, yada." And we got together for breakfast and just kind of kept meeting. But that goes back to like 2009.
Yeah.
Which seems like a long time ago.
Well, yeah, a long time ago. In fact, I like to think that I was the first guy ever to be subject to an internet, and first academic ever to be subject to an internet petition calling for my firing. I wear that as a badge of honor. I remember each day. And it wasn't just a petition in that people were allowed to not only sign it, but also leave their, observations on my character.
their thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, my secretary at the time and I, she would come in the morning and we would sit in my office and read what had been written about me overnight. And some of these people were so stupid that actually put their own names at the bottom of it. So, nice. That I got students and I knew exactly what they thought about me. They didn't even, have the wit to keep themselves anonymous at the time. Of course, it all seems old hat now. So many other people have experienced the same. But
since then, we've both lost our hair.
We've
both lost our hair since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many changes. But and
we've gotten and we've gone from being cynical to being wide-eyed optimists.
We have, yes. We're no longer the embittered bald guys. We are the cheerful, optimistic.
Very cheerful in our old age.
It's nearly over.
In fact, you and I both have birthdays this month.
We do. In fact, mine has just passed. I'm now officially, on paper, a year older than you, but you will be catching up.
I'm catching up. We're both looking just over the horizon at 60.
Yeah, we're born in the same month. We married around about the same year.
Yep.
Our lives have run eerily in parallel for many years.
That's right.
One thing, of course, that you and I both were blessed by, I think is right saying that we grew up in houses where we had good dads who were good role models.
Mhm.
And I was struck recently looking at something that the former England soccer manager, Sir Gareth Southgate, said in his Dimbleby lecture. Dimbleby lecture is a distinguished set of lectures named after a very prestigious and distinguished British broadcaster, Sir Richard Dimbleby. And in these Dimbleby lectures, Sir Gareth Southgate made the comment that something to the effect that young men, they need good role models. They don't need video games and pornography.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to the heart of what I would say is a sort of sad aspect of modern life. That when we look at the world around us, young men some of them seem to lack somebody to guide them to the good.
Yeah.
And as I was, seeing that comment by Sir Gareth Southgate, I also thought, this is a great opportunity for the church, because I don't want to sound heretical by saying the church doesn't just have the gospel. Of course, the gospel is everything.
Right.
But the church is not just preaching on a Sunday. It's not just singing together on a Sunday. The church is a community.
Right.
And if we're living in a world where young men really lack good role models, there is a tremendous opportunity for the church to speak to that. And now that, giving a young man a role model is not the gospel, but it could certainly draw young men under the sound of the gospel. And the feeling of that need can also make the gospel very compelling to young men. What do you think, Todd?
Well, as you said, having a role model is not the gospel, but it is a part of making disciples. And there's a crying need for it. I mean, how much, there's now big conversations and books being written and articles being written about how do we reach young men, or how do we fix young men? Because there's a problem. Men are getting married much later in life. They're having fewer children, if they're having children at all. They're lagging behind. For the first time in American history, there are more female students in university than there are male students for the first time. And this is actually not something to cheer about. That's not progress. That's not to say that university is for everybody. Man, there are careers in trades and that kind of thing that are great, particularly because there are so many colleges that aren't worth going to. But the point being is that young men have fallen behind in so many ways, in no small part due to the fact that from childhood, we have a generation that have been told that there's something fundamentally wrong with them because they are male. And now we have this phenomenon of the angry young man who's isolated, who's lonely, who spends all of his time online playing video games in a fantasy world because he wants a sense of adventure and he wants something heroic and courageous, and he doesn't feel up to it, but he can sure escape into hours of video games every night to feel that, and what the church has going for it. Now, you wouldn't know this from a lot of contemporary evangelical churches, but historically, what the church has going for it is a deep history, provisions for things like reverence and awe, discipline, teaching, responsibilities, the need for courage, the need to stand and to be willing to stand alone in a hostile culture. The church has all of these things in abundance. If the church will do that, if the church will be that. You and I were talking earlier about the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. Jordan Peterson has his fans, he has his critics. I lean in the fan side simply for this. Don't get your theology from him. Here's what I appreciate is that he came along 10 or 12 years ago saying positive things to young men about being a man, that was a good thing, and that they needed to do things like clean their room and show up for work 10 minutes early and stay 10 minutes late. All of these things, our parents taught us to do. He began challenging young men to stand up, to clean up their lives, stop watching porn, get off the computer, get a job. If they want a better job, then do the job they have really, really well, and they'll probably get a better job. All of these basic things that our churches ought to be teaching our young men, challenging our young men with. he started doing, and it's demonstrated there's a tremendous hunger for it. Now, that's also been an opportunity for a lot of wicked charlatans to step in. You know, your Andrew Tates and other people who have this very virulent, wicked, unhealthy, toxic message. But the church needs to be saying to young men, it's good that God made you the way he made you. There's honor in being a young man, and there's tremendous responsibility. Let me tell you what it means to be a young man, and what your opportunities are, and what your obligations are, and what you can do to have a life that has influence and that makes a difference. I mean, Jesus was doing this 2,000 years ago with a group of men. I mean, this is Christian discipleship. That's an aspect of Christian discipleship that the church can take up and can model for people. I mean, you know, what does Scripture tell us? Young women or old women, teach your young women. You know, old men, teach your young men. This ought to be daily routine in the life of the church, and now more than ever.
Yeah. I'm struck. I mean, one of my particular beefs is, you know, the way young men dress. I sit in the airport and viewers will be grateful that they don't have a video cast at this point, because my friend Todd is in his very casual T-shirt.
My T-shirt with the stretched out neck. Yeah.
There's a sense. One of the girls at First Things last year, I was talking to her and she asked me what music I listened to, and I made the comment, you know, I love the old Rat Pack stuff, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, etc., etc. She said, "Have you got a playlist?" And I said, "Sure, I'll send you my playlist." And my comment was, when I sent her the playlist, I said, "This is the kind of music that was popular when young men had to wear a jacket and tie to ask a girl out on a date."
Yeah.
Now, we can, you know, there's nothing wrong with dressing casually or that, but I am struck at the lack of consistent effort that a lot of young men put into dressing. And I'm not talking about wearing Sunday best or something like that.
Right.
You know, sweatpants and a hoodie, man. No, please. You know, when I get on a plane, I don't want to see sweatpants and hoodies, and yet they're ubiquitous and everywhere. And there's a sense in which the way you dress does reflect how you think about yourself. And
right.
I will polemicize to the day I die against the sort of the slovenliness of a lot of young men. I'm very glad to see that, certainly among some of the young guys at Grove, a movement towards, you know, not dressing in suit and tie, but just starting to sort of sharpen their dress a bit, on the grounds that tells me they're paying some attention, they're putting a bit of effort in. And I'm seeing a sort of parallel move in the church as well. And you sort of hinted at this, Todd, I think, in what you were saying, that I'm very struck that young people, certainly the young people I encounter at Grove, and they're probably not a cross-section of American society, they probably tilt conservative on the culturally, theologically, and politically. But I'm struck that the booming church in town is the Anglican church.
Mm-hmm.
Grace Anglican, very, very popular with young people. And when I ask them, you know, why do you go to the church? It's precisely the opposite reasons to those which people of our generation, Todd, would have given for going to a church in the 70s or the 80s when we were looking for the rock band. No, right. They want to go to a church with a historic liturgy and with a clear, disciplined structure to worship. Yeah. And that strikes me as, you know, as part of that broader cultural phenomenon you're pointing to, where people are getting tired and reacting against the sort of frothy, insubstantial culture as it's permeated Christianity. And just before we came on, Al, I think probably the closest thing the Alliance has to a tech bro, Al, the man who runs the recordings for us here and makes sure that everything is shipshape and Bristol fashion on the tech front. Al was commenting that in his church, large numbers of young people, young families, young singles coming into what is, we won't name the church, but really a very traditional Presbyterian church in central Pennsylvania. Not a rock band church. This is a kind of high Presbyterian church, one might say, from a worship perspective. So amidst all of the hoodies and the sweatpants, etc., I'm seeing some real signs of hope, sort of responding in some ways to that Gareth Southgate kind of challenge. Yes, I think there are big problems with young men and maybe young people in general at the moment, but there are also signs, there are green shoots or the clouds the size of a man's hand, indicating that something more substantial is moving in to fill the void that so much of the video / porn consuming generation represents.
Yeah, I see it. And, in our conservative PCA church, students, young couples, young families are coming. And if we were to, if we were to go the way of kind of the church growthy mode of broad evangelicalism and do skits and videos and that kind of thing, they would be among some of the ones that would say, one of the reasons I came to this church is because you don't do that stuff. And that's encouraging to hear. Now, we know, you and I both know, there's always going to be an audience for that stuff. And there's always going to be big churches that, get people to come in because they have a circus and a wrestling ring and that kind of thing on Sunday mornings. But that said, there's a large, and I think the evidence suggests there's a growing number of younger people that are saying, now we want something that's rooted in history, that has a sense of reverence about it, that takes things like doctrine seriously. And, the PCA is one of the few growing denominations in the country. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of PCA churches, but the point is that the PCA is not among those churches where you're going to walk in and the pastor's going to ride in on a Harley or come in on a zip line or, that kind of stuff. You're not going to see that kind of thing because there's a lot of young people that would walk out the door if they saw that kind of thing. And that's an encouraging point. And I think that, confessional churches that have their roots back in historic Christianity, confessional Protestant churches that really understand their history and value their history, have a real opportunity with, yes, younger people. I was at a classical Christian school just a couple of weeks ago. I was asked to just share for a while in a leadership class that the headmaster does with a group of students every year. And, it was great because, well, for one thing, they wear uniforms and they all look just really sharp. But the other thing is before class started, I had a brief conversation with, I believe he was a junior in high school, about Nietzsche, because part of his assigned reading was Nietzsche. In fact, on his desk, you'll like this, Carl, he had 3 books in a stack: Tolstoy, Nietzsche, and Augustine. And he could have and he was just he looked like any other high school junior, but he could have a conversation with you about those things. Now, that's not the kind of guy who's going to go to some church where they bring in drummers on zip lines. He's being taught to value things that are substantive, that are serious, that are rooted in history, that have something to say. And the church has an opportunity there. The other thing I would say is that he's also learning that there's something good and valuable about God's design for him as a male, as a man, that he actually doesn't have to apologize or feel automatically suspect that he's probably a predator because he's a man. Those things aren't being grounded into him. But that said, there are others that are. And gosh, this has been sometime within the last year. I forget what text I was preaching on, but it gave me opportunity to, at one point, say a word of encouragement to the young men in my church. And I said, listen, if you're one of our young kids who are boys or high school students or college students, you young men, I have something I want to say to you. And I just kind of went through a litany of why it's good that God has made them the way he has made them, and their role in creation, and why that's good and why that's valued and why there's dignity that's worth that's worth fanning into flame and then what was great is that afterwards, the number of moms I had come to me with tears in their eyes saying, "Thank you for affirming my son," because they see that everywhere their son looks, whether it's commercials or sitcoms or music or celebrities or whatever, their sons are being told that there's something fundamentally bad about them because they're male. And so while we confess, the truth that we're all sinners and we believe in, the radical sinfulness of mankind, we also believe in the radical goodness of God's design. And we need to be teaching our young men this, to not squander themselves away in loneliness and in isolation in front of a screen, to get out from behind that thing, that the real adventure is in real life. It's not in a game, it's in real life. And that the opportunity to walk with Jesus actually provides real adventure. And all the more so in this cultural moment. Carl, as you know well, I mean, you're lecturing all over the world on issues related to gender and the confusion and the melees that's fallen over young people. And you still talk to a lot of students. That message is true. There's an adventure to following Christ in a culture that hates Jesus. And the church needs to be calling our men to that. And this isn't about going out in the woods and beating a drum. It's about those daily disciplines of being a man and the daily responsibilities that call forth real discipline and real determination and real virtue.
Yeah, it certainly isn't about the sort of pulling out some kind of macho 1950s Americana and giving it a sort of Christian gloss.
Right. This is biblical virtue.
It has to be much deeper than that. And I think, you're pointing to that. There's a definite connection, I think, between the move towards traditional worship and depth of thought. That we have a generation of young people, some of whom are lost. Somebody once said, it's not. There's the famous Tolkien statement: "Not all who wander are lost." Well, there's also the not all who are lost wander. They sit in their basements looking at porn and playing video games.
Right.
But there are those, I think, who realize the absolute bankruptcy of what the modern world has sold them, and they're looking for substantial answers. They're not looking for easy pat answers, and that it will lead them to sophisticated liturgy, sophisticated theology, sophisticated reading. And again, this is why it's so important, I think, that the Protestant church grabs hold of this, because the blandishments, the lure of Eastern Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism can be very strong, because those traditions, they really do provide something beautiful. And particularly in the case of Roman Catholicism, they provide an intellectual depth that allows adherents to address the deepest questions that modernity has thrown up. And from my perspective, there are worse things you can convert to than Roman Catholicism. But it saddens me that I think Protestantism is better.
Right.
And we should have the answers. We shouldn't be losing. I know that probably on the whole, conversions from Catholicism to Protestantism are greater than from Protestantism to Catholicism. But the Protestants we lose to Catholicism are often the kind of people who would be leaders and influential in there. It's the intellectual go-getters we're losing. And I would love to see Protestantism retaining its brain's trust and making a stronger Protestantism for the future.
That's right. And Carl, as a historian, the Reformed tradition has a rich history of intellectual rigor, a rich history of valuing the life of the mind, a rich history of moral virtue. Whether you go back to the reformers directly or to the generation that followed them, there's a rich history of that. And I'm amazed every time I'm reading some of the Reformed scholastics, how often they make reference to the church fathers.
Yeah.
And so all of that history, all of that tradition belongs to us Protestants. The problem is if you go to a typical evangelical church, you'd never know it.
No.
And if I say, listen, if you're a confessional Protestant church, put that up front. You don't hide that in the basement. You put that on the walls like your favorite paintings.
Yeah. Good analogy. Good analogy.
And if you want to get real pragmatic about it, if you want to reach thoughtful students and young families that are wanting something substantive for their children one day. Lean into that. Don't move away from it. Lean into it, because it's a gift. It's a good thing. Carl, you mentioned earlier, this idea of mentoring our young men. And one of the things we need our men to be moving into are, deep Christian friendships. We just had a men's retreat and had a terrific time. Jason Halopoulos, a man who's been on our program before, was our speaker, and he did a phenomenal job. And one of his sessions was just on that, was on Christian friendship, and it was a great message. And I mean, our guys afterwards, I was talking to young men that were there, young husbands, young fathers, who were there, who were deeply affected by that talk because they felt that, and some of them have those kind of connections. Some of them feel the absence of that and want that desperately. In fact, I was talking to a guy just this morning in our church, and there's a group of those men that were there that are circling up now and are saying, this is what we need. We need a circle of Christian men, friends who really know us, who we're really known by, and to encourage each other and to challenge each other and to mentor each other. And so that was really encouraging. And again, those are the things that ought to be happening in the church. The church has that. Let's do it. Scriptures give us all the resources for it. Let's do it. So, huge topic, really important. Churches, please, pastors, please lean into this. Woo those young men in your church to a life that is deep and thoughtful and virtuous. They are hungry for that. Even if they don't know it yet, they are hungry for it. And I have too many conversations about this to not know it's true. So thank you all for joining us today. Please, if you get a chance, run over to our website, mortificationofspin.org. You'll find a resource that we're going to be offering you free of charge to any of our fortunate winners, but you can enter to win that there. And if you'd like to make a donation to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals so that they can continue to provide good content, I know that the Alliance would be very thankful for that. Until then, thank you all for joining us, and we'll look forward to being with you next time on Mortification of Spin.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel so spring has sprung. And every time I see you grin, I'm such a happy individual. The moment that you speak, I want to go play.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.